We are back again with the Pat Stedman podcast interview series. And today we have Jack North, dating and relationship coach. Jack, you were a very, very popular option. I hadn't heard of you before, but then I kept getting these DMs like, got to get Jack North on. Got to get Jack North on. I was like, all right, let's go. Checked you out. Very legit. It's great to have you on.
I'm happy to be here, man. It's good to talk to you.
So tell me a little bit about how you got started in this. I mean, it sounds like I don't know your exact story, but you've been coaching since 2015, which is when I've been coaching since. So, I mean, to a certain extent, we're OGs at this point. That's a long time.
Yeah, it's been a hot minute since it got started, right? Actually, I started my blog originally because I was trying to help guys who were in the same place where I was before, and I hadn't even considered turning it into a business or anything. And then people started emailing me and messaging me saying like, okay, love your blog, love what you're talking about, but can I pay you to come out and like actually teach me, to work with me on this stuff? And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. And then from there, it's just grown and kind of snowballed into its own thing.
So you started doing boot camps, it sounds like.
Yeah. So I started doing boot camps, and I started doing one-on-one coaching. And obviously Corona kind of put a stop to a lot of that because I'm based out here in Seoul, Korea. And so we just couldn't get people into the country anymore, right? So we moved online and started doing video courses there. So now the same content that we teach in the boot camps here is accessible globally.
Okay. But you still do boot camps now?
Yes.
That's cool. So tell me a little bit about like, how did you get involved with the game, so to speak? What was the pathway here?
I mean, probably the same as most guys, which is that when I was young, dumb, and horny, I didn't know what I was doing, right? And so you try to figure it out. And unfortunately for me, there was nobody like me in Korea at all. And so I just had to kind of power through it and figure it out on my own. And that obviously took longer than I would have liked, which is why I, try to help guys now to speed things along for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, what took you out to Korea? I mean, when you started your business, were you out in Korea already, or was that?
Yeah, I was already out here. I've been living here in Korea since 2009.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, as soon as I graduated from college, university, whatever you want to call it, a couple months later, I just hopped on a flight out to Korea and set up shop here. Been working here ever since.
So what was it about Korea in particular that stood out?
The honest truth, like I wish I had like some grand story for you about like my history with Korea or something like that. Actually, I got offered a job in Korea and one in Taiwan, and I just flipped a coin and it landed on Korea. So I came and never really looked back.
Mm. And that was like a totally different kind of job than
completely different.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, were you like involved in trying to meet girls, pick up girls prior to? I mean, obviously, young guy would like to, but I mean, from the standpoint of understanding game, when you started to like get yourself maybe more involved in that world, were you doing that prior to moving to Asia?
Not really. So I actually got out of a very long relationship just before I came to Korea. I'd been in a relationship for about 8 years, which contributed heavily to the fact that I didn't know anything about how to deal with women, right? Because, when you're in a relationship for that long, especially when you're young, you don't have any real sense of what to do or how to talk to people in any way other than just either as friends or in the context of a long-term relationship. And so trying to figure out how can you spark things? How can I get someone interested in me and then take that interest and turn it into attraction and then build that into something more? Like all of that stuff was just totally foreign to me. I couldn't wrap my head around it at that point. And so I had no idea what I was doing when I got here.
So it was at some point in your time of being in Korea. I mean, did you feel like when you first got to Korea, I don't know if you spoke some Korean? You'd studied any Korean? No.
I,
So
I had nothing when I got here.
so what was it like when you first came to a country you didn't speak the language at all? I'm not sure if how many South Koreans assume it's South Korea, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
assume many
yeah.
South Koreans speak English.
Well, it's obviously a bit better now than it was in 2009, and I'm in Seoul now. But when I first got here, I was out in the countryside in a small town of about like 30,000 people, and so there was virtually no English, and there were I think about 25 total foreigners in the whole city,
Hmm.
and so it was really trippy actually, right? Because I didn't know any of the language. Learned how to read it quickly because I mean you have to, right?
Yeah.
Just to even get around, find restaurants, anything. And I learned enough like survival Korean to get by, and then I've obviously studied and learned more the longer I've been here. But when I first landed, I was just fish out of water. What the hell's going on?
Yeah. So, were you in that small town? I'm gonna make an assumption you weren't dating too much in that small town.
Certainly tried, but I failed miserably.
Yeah.
Like it took me about 6 months to actually get a date after landing here, which
Mm.
is horrible, right? Like 6 months of I'm horny, I'm lonely, I'm trying, but you know, like especially when you don't speak the language and not many people do, not many people speak English, that is, and you don't know how to actually like talk to girls. You don't know how to work with that kind of relationship and get things going, and just it was maybe the worst possible situation to try to figure it out in because I didn't have the numbers
Mm.
possible to just go out and like try to meet people and try to meet people and try to meet people because I would instantly be identified as like, oh, he's that guy, right?
Yeah.
Because when you're one of 25 foreigners in the city and everybody knows who you are, you have to also be a little bit more careful about like, okay, I don't need to get a reputation for accosting women on the street or anything.
Yeah. Yeah, especially as a foreigner, the locals can sometimes, especially in smaller towns, get a little angry about that.
Yes, they can. I very much got accused of being here to steal their women
Yep.
many times, and I always felt like that was a really weird thing to say. Like, you're here to steal our women, and I'm like, okay, well, if they choose to go with me, what does that say about you? Because I'm pretty shit at what I'm doing right now.
Mhm.
So if you can't keep them on your own, then like, what's going on with you guys?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a I'm really curious about how this is gonna build up with the game perspective. So, first thing that kinda comes to mind is, um, one of the things I remember reading quite a bit about in, back in the PUA days was about guys who could pull women without even, like, essentially saying a word to them, maybe, like, a word or 2, basically, but there's no
Yeah,
communication at all. So, having to play the game on hard, I
yeah,
I guess in some ways, there is a gift to it, though, that you have to really improve the fundamentals. You know,
you do.
you can't focus on guys are always focused on, like, "What should I say? How should I" it's like, you're like, "I don't know how to say anything," so I have to
Right.
I have to make sure my body language and,
Exactly.
everything comes across. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, what did you really learn that matters fundamentally?
So, I mean, obviously, like you said, body language, things like that. Figuring out how to create kind of open communication feeling in the way that you hold yourself and the way that you talk to someone, and uh, adding in kind of ridiculous and silly things like peacocking a little bit. I mean, like I have back here, you can't really see too much, but I have a wall of like silly hats and things that I would wear out, and so something like that that can work as a conversation starter without language was important. Learning how to speak a version of English that it doesn't. It's not like talking down to them. I've seen guys try this before, where they try to like speak dumb English, right? They're like, "Oh, me, Jack." It's like,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
don't do that, right? That just makes you sound like an idiot. But instead, learning how to use a lower vocabulary, speak a little bit slower and really emphasize the words that you know she's going to know that get the basic point across. So you create a sentence that's maybe 10 words long, but you only punch 3 of them. And those are the only 3 that matter, right? And she can kind of pick up the rest through context. And, you know, the more of the language you learn, the more you can kind of like intersperse that with English and go back and forth, and not taking it too seriously, right? Like, so even specifically telling her, I speak English like a toddler, or I speak Korean like a toddler, so bear with me. And, you know, making a joke of it, because it is funny, right? If you try to come across as serious, but also you sound like a toddler, it's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
So there were a lot of different things like that.
Okay. So, how was getting like what so it took about 6 months, you got a first date.
Yeah.
How did that date go?
That date went very well. I mean, we went out and got drunk and then made some more bad decisions. But the worst decision was that I ended up sticking with this girl for much longer than I should have, because I had this feeling of like, okay, if it took me 6 months to get a date, then I don't have options, right? So I need to stick with a girl who's down to hang out with me more.
Mhm.
And this girl ended up being a bit of a crazy one, to the point where she tried to stab me. And I eventually, years later, wrote a book about it called The Crazed Lover. And it's just it's one of those stories where, like, if I had had options, if I had known game, if I had known what I was doing, that relationship wouldn't have been a relationship, right? It would have been a hookup, maybe a short-term fling, a week or two, but it wouldn't have turned into this situation where I feel trapped and she feels like she's got me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Now, can I ask, did she really, I mean, maybe you initiated it, but did she really pursue you after that initial opening?
Well, she definitely didn't let go,
Yeah.
right? She was the kind of girl who like, once they latch on, then they're on,
Mhm.
right? And so she immediately started, and this is one of the things that I talk about with the crazed lover archetype, is these girls, the crazed lovers, they'll not just latch on to you and your life, but they'll start to plant themselves in different parts of your life. They'll start becoming close with your friends and your friends' girlfriends, and you know, they'll meet your coworkers, and they'll start, you know, oh yeah, I of course I traded messages with your coworker, right? It's okay, we're both girls, right? It's not, that's not weird. But they start to just intertwine themselves into every aspect of your life, so that should you ever try to leave, you're going to have a really hard time untangling her from all of the other parts of your life. And so, especially when you're in a small place like that, there's nowhere else to go. Your choice is stick with her or lose pretty much your whole social life. And she knew what she was doing, right?
Right.
It wasn't by accident.
Mhm. Well, why did she stab you?
That's that one's a weird story. So I guess to cut it as short as possible. I she was very drunk. It was a holiday here. It was the Korean Thanksgiving, and she got shit faced with her family and friends. And then I met up with her and her friends out at a bar, and I tried to speak Korean with them, but it wasn't very good. And like, adding me into the conversation slows the whole thing down. Like, and it makes it so that they can't really talk to each other, or they talk to each other and I don't understand a bit.
Yeah.
And so after like introductions and, you know, some basic Korean with them, then I was just like, okay, well, I'm gonna hang out with my buddies over here. We're gonna play darts. And then she got so furious because she felt like I had snubbed her friends by not staying there and talking with them. So mad that she then like took a couple of beer bottles, broke them on the table, and tried to stab me. And
In front of
fortunately,
everybody.
she was very drunk and like not very coordinated, so it wasn't difficult for me to, you know, move out of the way. But it's still just like, what have you, why would you even think that that's the correct response?
Yeah. How did her friends respond to the whole situation?
She did that once we got back home.
Oh yeah.
While we were still at the bar, she was just, like, that thing that girls do where they just like, they get pissy and they just kind of shut down, but you can see all the heat simmering underneath.
Yeah.
Right? And everyone else is like, right, I'm not fucking touching that.
Yeah. Interesting. So after that relationship, I mean, how much longer were you in that small town for?
So fortunately, I was leaving the town about a month after that thing went down. And so I just had to essentially lose my social life for the rest of that month. And then I moved up to Seoul, where that wasn't as much of an issue anymore, because there were plenty of people, plenty of places to go, and more than enough foreigners to make friends and not just be recognized everywhere.
Right. And did you say you kind of found yourself in the expat community in Seoul initially? Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the expat community in Seoul is pretty large, and like that segments off into different parts of the city and different age groups, different interest groups, things like that.
Okay. Interesting. So, and obviously a lot more of the Koreans in Seoul speak English. So
yeah, the English level is a lot higher in Seoul, to the point where, honestly, like, even whenever I'm coaching guys, I tell them, like, even if you've learned some Korean, don't approach in Korean. You should always approach in English. And that blows their mind at first, right? They're like, why would I do that? No. Like, I've been studying Korean. My Korean's good. And I'm like, okay, cool. Your Korean is good. How good? Because when you approach the girl and you're speaking to her in Korean, you've now set the tone of the language of our relationship is Korean. Are you committed to carrying this thing forth only in Korean, however long it goes, whether that's all night long or into something more? Are you committed to that being the base language? And if not, which right, you're not, right?
Yeah.
You're not ready for that. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Then just don't do that. Set the tone as English.
Yeah. And I'd also imagine that it accomplishes two other things, which is creates a pattern interrupt. So, she's not, I mean, I guess if you're white, maybe she expects you to say something in English, but she doesn't know what you're asking for at first. So she's more inclined to like stop and listen. And then I would also say that it's more of a pleasant surprise for her later on to learn that you actually do speak Korean, rather
Right.
than to try to lead with it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's what I advise guys. Is I'm like, use the Korean that you do know as a fun surprise later. Use it as maybe as a reward for her, right? If things are going well and then you're like, oh, you know what? You're so cool, you're so fun to hang out with, but say it in Korean. And then just like blow her mind, right?
Yeah. Because she's definitely not expecting that.
Right. Yeah. Like she's never expecting that.
Okay. So I'm really curious about the boot camp stuff, because I always like guys who do boot camps always have like a little bit of a different flavor, in terms of, so kind of take us through what you teach guys in a boot camp.
So for me, the boot camps are a very specific part of what I do. It's not the same as the things that I teach in long-term coaching.
Right.
And I offer them as completely different products with different ends in mind.
Sure.
The boot camp is very approach focused, and that's for guys who are they want to go out, they want to start meeting people, they want to start meeting women, especially the younger guys who are like, I want to meet lots of women so that I can better understand women and know the right ones when a relationship comes along. Great. So for them, the very first thing to do in a boot camp is to break them, right? Like, because they always have anxiety about the approach, or about what to say, or about how do I lead the conversation or whatever. And so this is actually one of the reasons that I still have all the silly hats, because, okay, put on a hat that it's a shark head, right? Where you have to wear a shark head and you have to go up to these girls and deliver just ridiculous lines. We run exercises where we make up terrible lines for one another that the other guy has to deliver, and basically just throw them as far into the deep end as possible, as fast as possible on the very first night. And that breaks them of any anxiety. Because if you can approach a girl, asking about painting her toenails while you're wearing a shark on your head, then you can approach a girl and tell her that she's cute, right? It makes the other stuff easy. And so that's what we do at the beginning. We start with breaking all their anxiety, breaking any of the worries that they have. The next day, we start working on, okay, now you're trying to turn the approaches into something more. Our goal is to have a party at 6 p.m. today. This is the place where we're having the party. Your job is to get as many girls to come to this party as possible. It's easy, right? Like, now all you need to do is you just need to talk to them, build up a little bit of a conversation, and say, hey, we're having a party tonight at 6 p.m. And what the guys don't exactly realize is that this is the exact same as asking them on an Insta date or getting their number, but with plans to have a date later. And so I give them the framework to do it. And then later I explain to them, okay, this is what you've been doing. You've already done this. So any worries that you had in your head about, oh, but I don't know how to ask a girl on a date once we start talking. No, you've already done it.
Yeah.
You've already done it. I don't know how to ask a girl to go on an Insta date with me right now. No, you've already done it, right? And so I get them to do the thing without telling them what they're doing at first. And that always just makes it much easier. And then by that point, right, we actually do have a party that night.
Yeah.
And,
There's actually a party.
I mean, and the girls come, but like it's not like a private party or anything. It's just at a bar.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Yeah. So they're like, the girls come, the girls go. It doesn't matter. But at that point, now these guys are already on top of the world because they're like, yeah, you know what? I got 5 girls to come. Oh, I got 7 to come. Oh, and then they're already in the right mood. They're in the social mood, and they're at a bar and they're having a party, and they pretty much all succeed with whatever it is they're looking for that night at the bar.
That's good, and I like that also because I think it dovetails into a skill that people can use when it comes to social circle, because the idea of trying to start a party at a bar is in like looking at a bar almost as if it is like a house party sort of situation.
Yeah.
It's good. It carries over because, you can be doing that with your entire network and say, hey, we're having a party at this, and getting people to come and bringing that same energy. And you can synthesize just in your regular life some cold approaching with like, you have your friends going to a bar at this time, and then you're approaching girls in the street, inviting them to come to it.
Sure.
It offers a lot of opportunities.
Well, and once you start practicing doing that, then anytime you're going to meet your friends at the bar and you're just walking on the street on the way there, you see cute girls and you're like, hey, you look cool and we're having a party. Cool people are only invited. So you're invited. It's down here. Starts in about 30 minutes. Hope you'll be there, right? And you just start doing that. And you end up creating your own kind of charismatic character, like a caricature of yourself that you can present to people on the street, and you can like go in and out of that mode instantly to get people in, to bring them into the party, to turn the energy up when you need to.
Do you think it's kind of like an alter ego that people develop?
I think it's more like not necessarily an alter ego, because you're not changing who you are or the things that you say, but it's like you take your personality and you just turn the volume up to 11. Right? Like if you might have like a volume down version of yourself whenever you're talking to children or your grandmother or a stranger next to you on the plane or whatever, right? Like you turn the personality down a bit, but then the same thing is true whenever you're going into these situations. I don't want to say playing a character, but yeah. I hope you understand what I mean, where you just turn your personality up.
Yeah. And so, so those are the first 2 days. Is there a third day to the boot camp, or is it?
Yeah. So it's a 3-day boot camp. We do Friday night, and then all day Saturday is that thing. And then Sunday, what we do is depending on how everybody went for the night, right? But we'll meet up that Sunday and we go over, okay, so on Friday night, we set forth what you would view as success for this weekend. Did you get there? Why or why not? What is the plan moving forward to keep the things that you did this weekend? Because I know that whenever you're out with your buddies, you're out at a boot camp or something, and you have that feeling of like, oh, I'm going to do it. I'm going to approach all the girls. I'm going to make the party happen. I'm going to do this. Okay.
Mhm.
But then that goes away, once you're not in that setting anymore. So, okay, what are you going to do? What conditioning tricks did I teach you to keep yourself in that mindset? What are you going to apply to your life moving forward? What are your goals going to be moving forward? How often are you going to check in with me and let me know, like, okay, are you keeping up with the things that you said? Are you still doing the things that you said you were going to do?
Mhm.
And we basically make a plan for them going forward. One of the things that I've found about boot camps that uh, now, from what I've heard, because I haven't been to any other coaches' boot camps, but what I've heard is that a lot of times the guys will have that thing where they have great success during the weekend or during the week or however long it is, but then they lose it over time and they have no way to really regain it. And so we actually run a Discord community where all the guys who've joined the boot camp, they're in there forever, right? And
Yeah.
they can talk to me, they can talk to the other guys as well. And so if they're having trouble finding that motivation again, then like, okay, cool. Let's figure out what's going on with you. Let's figure out some sort of a mental reframe, something to help you get back into that thing. So instead of just saying, okay, cool, we did our thing. Now you're out in the cold, have fun. I bring them all in, and they're all part of the community.
Yeah, because post boot camp sort of come down is definitely a real thing. I mean, I've been through boot camps myself, been through a boot camp myself, and I did run one just kind of as like a trial. But at that point, I was like about to get married, and it just I kind of felt like I wasn't really congruent anymore. But I think the main thing for a boot camp is that if you can, like, it's kind of like a peak experience, like Tony Robbins talks about that.
Sure.
And I think the really big advantage is that even though it's almost inevitable, there's going to be some come down from the boot camp. It's like if you almost look at it from like a trading chart perspective, like you hit an all-time high, and so it kind of shows you something else that's possible. Like you can anchor in to how you were at that moment, and so now
Right.
that you're capable of doing it, and that moves your entire level of game up
Yeah.
overall.
Yeah, for sure. And there are a lot of different techniques you can use to create an anchor that can bring you back, even if it's not quite back to where you were on that moment, that can put you into that state of mind. And one of the ones that I use is music. So I'll have the guys like, okay, pick a song. Doesn't even matter what song it is. I don't care. But pick a song. That's your song this weekend. So anytime you're just taking like 10-minute break, okay? You're just setting up shop, maybe you're grabbing a coffee or something. Put the song on in your earphones.
Mhm.
And you're going to use the same song all weekend long. This is your song. And what this will do for you is then next time that you hear this song, it's going to bring you back to this moment. And you can use that if you're needing some help with state control. You're like, okay, I felt so high, I felt so ready to do it then. How can I get back to that? Put your song on. And for me personally, that song is Soul with a capital S by Tower of Power. I know I'm showing my age. Like I'm an old man for it, but okay, fine. That song, for whatever reason, it just gets me going. And like as soon as that thing starts playing, I hear the horns going. I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. We're on. And that just it gives me the energy, and it literally changes my mental state and my physical state.
Mhm.
So using things like that, or a physical trigger. I had one guy who I was trying to find a trigger that would work for him, and the trigger he chose was before he would approach a girl, if he felt a little bit nervous or anxious, he would slap himself on the ass and go in. And I was like, okay, man, look, if it works for you, if this trigger gets you to do the thing that you want to do, then it works, and that's all that matters.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
But it's good. It's good. Yeah. I mean, to have an anchor, I mean, that's very proven to work as like some sort of trigger point to change your state automatically. Um, so are most of, I mean, obviously during COVID, people couldn't come in to the country, but are most of your clients South Koreans?
No.
Yeah.
Um, I had thought whenever I first started coaching and started bringing people on, I thought that I was going to get maybe even parity between Koreans and foreigners. But the Koreans, I it has not been what I thought at all. They don't come to me, and I don't think it's a language thing either, because a lot of the Korean guys who I've met, like whenever I'm out and whenever I'm out and I see guys that are struggling, I'm like, hey, can I give you some tips? Okay, and you know what? If this works for you, shoot me an email and maybe we'll set something up.
Yeah.
And the Korean guys, they have this ego block where they feel like no, you can't tell us how to meet our own women. And I'm like, okay, maybe you're right, but also look at your current success rate, look at mine, and like, I don't know, maybe you could learn something from it, right? But it's been hard for me to get that message across to them.
Yeah. So it sounds like only like a handful of really come in pretty much.
Yeah, only a few Koreans, and even those are usually like Korean Americans or Korean Canadians, right? And so even though they're Korean, they still have most of the same struggles that foreigners have with it.
Right. So what do you, I mean, tell us a little bit about Korean culture, and especially, of course, Korean dating culture. What's going on there? I mean, I know like Korea is like going extinct. I mean, the total fertility rate is like, I don't know, is it like 1.1 at this point?
I think it may be below 1 at this point. It's
unbelievable.
It's rough, and I mean there are some different reasons for that, but
talk about all this stuff. This is interesting.
Okay, all right. I mean, one of the biggest reasons for people not having very many kids is because the cost of having kids, especially in Korea, is insanely high, because there's so much social pressure on having to do all of these extra things, right? Like the kids don't just go to school. They go to school and then they go to 4 or 5 other after school academies every single day of the week. And so they're going to these English academies and these art academies and music and math and science and coding and all this other stuff that it's just expected that if you don't want your kid to be an idiot, if you want them to be able to keep up with everyone else, they need to be studying for 12 to 16 hours a day minimum, right? And I mean, that obviously costs a lot, because each one of these after school programs is, you know, it's an extra $1,000 a month or $800 a month or what, like it's a lot. And so the economic reality for most people is that one kid is crazy expensive, but like, okay, we can find a way to do it. But the idea of having like 3 or 4 kids is just
unheard of.
No, we couldn't even consider that as an option. And so that's one of the biggest reasons for just a low birth rate overall. But the dating culture is really odd, because 30, if for women especially, if you're not married by 30, then you're considered like damaged goods, or there's something wrong with you. And so 30 is the cutoff. But at the same time, they also tell them that 25 is too young to get married. And so what you end up with is this rush of women who are like 28, 29, and they're all just like trying to get a serious relationship, a serious boyfriend, but they don't know how to date. They don't know how to meet each other. So I don't know. I guess I'll go on Tinder and I'll try to find like a serious relationship. That's not going to work, right? Sure. And you end up with either bad marriages that come about as a result of trying to rush into something,
sure, or
the girl's past 30 and they're like, okay, well, now the pressure's just off. Now I'm just damaged goods, so it doesn't matter anymore. And so it creates this really weird dichotomy of the very few people who actually create serious and stable relationships that turn into marriages, and then everyone else who's like, I don't know, he was there and he didn't seem like a total loser, so I went for it. We got married. Marriage is not as much of an act done out of love and relationship as it is out of economic and social responsibility.
Yeah. So when girls are over 30, I mean, do they just hook up pretty much? Is that basically what happens?
Yeah, I mean, and they may eventually just be like, okay, fine. I suppose I'm going to get ugly by 40, so I'll start I'll start entertaining offers for longer term relationships. But yeah, I'm past 30, so I'm already damaged goods to the best men. So
Mhm.
I'm gonna just kind of hang out and then see what comes along.
It's really interesting how such a super rigid culture, can destroy itself because it's like it's stuck between 2 worlds
Yeah,
that, a lot of these mores that maybe made sense 40 years ago, um, it's like they're trying to have it both ways, and as a result, they have nothing, and it's really like, almost astounding that at this point, I mean, having a total fertility rate, like, at 1 or below it, which is probably about the lowest in the entire world.
it's down there with Japan.
Yeah, yeah, I think actually Japan might be slightly better, but I mean, they're both good examples of it, right?
Mhm.
It's people talk a lot about European demographic issues, which are real, but I mean, East Asian is just in unbelievable. It's really hard to comprehend, and yet there hasn't been some, like, "Look, just get married and have some kids." Like
Right.
forget about the rest of the stuff, just have babies and, like, they can't
Yeah,
do that. They can't do
yeah.
it. And I wonder, do you think that once this sort of older cohort, because what is the main demographic age in South Korea right now? Is it, like, in the 40s and 50s? Is that, like, the big heavy or is it high even older than that? Like, at what point do you think? Because eventually, once the older generation goes away, I think a lot of this stuff is gonna collapse. Like, it
Yeah,
can't
like
can't sustain. A lot of
uh,
the expectations, I mean, are gonna have to collapse because there's the people who were putting, because it's very much a respect the elderly culture.
sure.
So, I feel like eventually it's gonna change, but where's, like, the real demographic bump? Because I think in China, like, the big numbers are in the 40s and 50s and 60s.
Right. I If I were going to hazard a guess, I would say because I mean I don't especially study like the demographics and
Sure.
things, but there was obviously a huge loss of population in the Korean War in 50 to 53.
Mhm.
And then immediately following that, those that were still there would have just been like, okay, our one job is to pump out as many kids as possible.
Yeah.
So probably in that like 50 to 65-ish age range is just a massive bubble.
Mhm.
And it's fast approaching retirement age for this group of people that it's going to be like, oh no, oh no, look at what we've done, because you don't have enough young people working to support that aging demographic. And yeah, China and Japan are suffering from the same thing. Most of East Asia is.
Mhm.
And I wonder about that because it's kind of like you were saying about there being the two competing worldviews of the traditional Korean view, and I guess just the Asian view in general, like of the very family heavy, very family centric, and then the more modern view of, oh no, you're free, you can do whatever you want, oh it doesn't matter, oh don't worry about it, get married anytime, sure you can have kids when you're 50.
Yeah.
And I there obviously will come a reckoning very soon of like, no, you can't have kids when you're 50, at least not if you're female, and you can't instantly replace a lacking half generation. And you have a country that's too insular and, if we're being entirely honest, xenophobic to try and use immigration to replace it, which is
Yeah.
what a lot of the West is trying to do. Like trying to just replace the not having kids with more immigration. Like, well, you can't do
It's a
that here.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. What was I gonna say? So, and obviously, so you gave us a little bit of a taste of the dating culture, but like, what are Korean women like?
Oh, fantastic. No, and as with any large group, there's no one size fits all.
Mhm.
Um, but I have very much enjoyed dating the different girls out here, to the point where, I mean, I wrote up 13 different archetypes of like the different types of women out here, and they range from like the crazed lover that I told you about before, to the shy girl or the prude or the worker bee. Obviously, you have your sluts, your alcoholics, your attention whores, right? And they kind of cover all of the different things depending on what you're into and what it is, what kind of relationship you're looking for. There is a type of girl here in Korea that you're going to like. And at least from my experience, any of these types has been an improvement over the same Western counterpart.
Hmm.
Uh, because there are still plenty of foreign women out here. And whenever I see them out, whenever we hang out with them, whenever we're in social groups together, even no matter which archetype they kind of fall into themselves, they seem to just be like an inferior version of that compared to the Koreans, which is unfortunate for them. They have a very hard time over here. Foreign guys have a great time here once they get the hang of it and they figure out what they're doing. But foreign women have a tough time. They have a
That's
tough time
interesting.
with it.
Why do you think that is? What is it that makes Korean women as like a improvement?
Well, at least in the comparison between those, I'm not sure that the Korean women are actually an improvement as much as they are just the standard bearers, and then the Western women just keep getting worse and worse, right?
Uh-huh.
Like every year they're getting more woke and more outspoken about things that just don't matter, and they're like, oh, I'm angry at you for this, and like, oh, that was a microaggression. You're like, okay, but we're just trying to drink and have fun, so maybe take that outside.
So, do you think it's this sort of like ideological nature of Western women and sort of entitlement that comes with it? Is there what do you think?
I don't think it's the nature. I don't think it's the nature. I think that
Yeah,
they
I agree. That was a yeah, I didn't mean to use that word, but,
yeah.
like, this is how they've started to behave.
I think that they're getting poisoned. They're getting
Yeah,
poisoned by Instagram and by TikTok now, but it's not like it just started now, right? This has been going on for decades, that it's been getting worse and worse, and it's just been accelerating over the last 5 to 10 years, really. And yeah, it's all the stuff that they see in media that they're told that they should care about, even though the truth is that, like, they don't, right? Whenever they first hear about some of these things, and they're like, microaggression, what is that? Like, it's even small in its name. Why should I even care,
yeah,
right? But it becomes a thing, like, oh, you don't realize how important it is. Oh, but it's not. And
yeah.
so they get inundated with this stuff of like, these are the important things. And it's like, okay, your countries are dying because you can't make enough babies, and you think that the most important thing is somebody's choice of words. Like,
Yeah,
it's not.
yeah, yeah, they're it's I mean, I just call it what it is, which is communist brainwashing.
Yeah, it's communist propaganda. It's poison. It's
Yeah,
poison. It's
yeah.
cultural poison.
It's interesting to me, though, that women who would be, like, expats in Seoul would care so much about that. Because it's wouldn't it I mean, how much is the Korean population on board with any of that stuff?
They're not.
Yeah,
They're not at all. And that's why I was saying that they have a really hard time here, because if you're used to the Korean ideal that they carry around, like the version that they use for their dramas and movies and whatever else, is this demure, shy, quiet girl who, like, oh, occasionally she'll get impassioned about something, or she'll get angry about this thing or whatever, but as a general rule, she's following the man's lead. She's listening to him, and like, even if she gets pissed about it and it creates some strife in there, that kind of thing is the ideal. But then whenever you have a girl who just comes in and she's like, all right, I'm wearing military boots and we're about to kick some ass. Let's fight about anything, about nothing, about whatever, right? Like, then Korean guys are like, what? No, Jesus. Oh, gross. Why would I go through extra effort of speaking English just to get abused more? No, that's not good.
No, it's interesting. I think it was like a year or so ago. I remember reading something about like an Anglo woman who was complaining about her time in Russia. Like none of the Russian guys gave her any attention. You know,
Yeah,
I like, you just would think that this would be like a self-awareness moment for a lot of these women, but you know, I do think eventually this stuff breaks, but the question is how much damage gets done in the meantime.
right.
And
Right.
what are you gonna do with like a generation of, spinster harpy women?
Woke scolds.
Yeah, I mean, there's gonna be a whole category of women who are going to be old, single, and bitter. And
But silver lining, no more stray cats. Cat adoption goes through the roof. So at least there's that, right? Save the cats. Let the
it's
spinsters
true.
free.
Stray animals will benefit from this. There's always a silver lining. There's always a silver lining. Um, what was I gonna say with this? So, okay, so that's interesting. Now, I've heard two stereotypes about one about specifically Korean women, but one about East Asian women in general. And I'm curious, if you can vouch for it. The first is that like Korean women like will look gorgeous for a very long period of time. They almost don't look like they have like a gradual aging. Like a woman at 35 or even 40 can look as good as like one who's like 25. But then something happens like in the mid 40s and they just drop off a cliff all of a sudden. Is that accurate?
Yeah, pretty much. They and it's this amazing thing that happens, and we always joke about it whenever they hit whatever their wall is, right? Because for some of the girls it's as early as 40, but for some they keep going through like 50, 55, and like they're
Mm.
still looking pretty good. But then one day what happens is they get visited by the old lady fairy, and they wake up in the morning with the perm,
Yeah.
and like, okay, it's over, it's over.
Mhm.
On the plus side, though, even as they age and they get older, they don't get fat. Like
Right.
they get like a little bit plump and doughy, right? But they don't get fat, which is a big benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, the other one is this. So I've heard that Asian women are they're very feminine, very submissive, um, during dating. But I've heard that in marriages, they can become very domineering. Have you seen that reflected over here?
Uh, yes, and yes, with in certain ways.
Okay.
So generally speaking, most again, I'm painting with a really broad brush
Of
here.
course, of course.
This is obviously like not all right. Okay, but
No, this is every Korean.
every
Every
single
Korean.
Korean couple right now. So most of the Korean households are essentially run by the wife because the men are expected to work 60 to 80-hour weeks for their companies.
Yeah.
And so like, and some of them even work in different cities. So they'll like live out in the countryside with the family, but then they work in Seoul. So then they'll rent like a small little efficiency here to work here during the week, and then there'll be couples on the weekend. There's actually a Korean word for it, right? They call them weekend couples
Uh-huh.
because they're just only together on the weekend. And so the wife takes care of not just everything in the house, but also like the finances and taking care of any major decisions about buying things, or about what we need, or about what we're going to do.
Mhm.
How much spare cash do we have? Can we take a vacation? If so, how big of one can we do? Most women will do that stuff because the man just isn't isn't present and doesn't have the time to deal with that stuff. And so that has become such a big part of the culture that a lot of times they will create this, what would seem like a domineering facade to anybody from the outside, but inside of the relationship there's actually a bit of a different dynamic,
Mhm.
where a lot of times the guy will just say like, yeah, look, you take care of everything, you do all this stuff, but at the end of the day, right, the buck still stops with me.
Yeah.
So think about it more like a CEO, right? Like, is Elon Musk taking care of all the decisions and all the things at Twitter? No. But then whenever he says like, no, we're going to do this thing, or no, you cannot do this thing,
Mhm.
that stands, that goes. And so even if, you know, his CFO and like all the managers and stuff are taking care of all the other things, and he's free to focus on what's important to him, but then at the end of the day, he can still veto whatever. And that's how most of the relationships here work.
That's
At
interesting.
least from my experience, from what
Yeah,
I've seen.
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, you've been there for a long time, so you got a lot of experience. And I think it's always helpful to see it from an outsider's perspective too.
Sure.
Um,
Well, like I'm married here too, so
yeah,
like it's not just me and my relationship with my wife, but also like I'm obviously very well acquainted with my in-laws, right? And so like
sure.
seeing the dynamic between the two of them, and how their household runs, which is basically as I described.
But do you run it in the same way, or do you like how
Yeah,
does
I
it work
mean
for you guys?
it's definitely not quite the same as how my in-laws run it.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes down to just the difference between cultures and what I view as acceptable and what he views as acceptable. So this was an interesting moment for me. The first time that I went over to their home for dinner, uh, mom had spent 3 hours cooking this amazing dinner, all these different things, and then we finished eating all together. And as we're done, I get up and I start like clearing the table and moving things over to the sink. And my father-in-law just looks at me confused. He's like, What are you doing?" And I
Mhm.
was like, "I'm clearing the table. I'm just kind of helping to clean up, wiping things down." And he's like, "No, you're not a woman. Come
Yeah,
and sit
yeah.
with me. Come and sit with me on the sofa and let's watch TV while they clean up." And I was just like, "No, I can't do that, because if I went over to someone's house as a guest and I didn't even at least offer to help clean up, my mother would show up and beat the shit out of me. Like, no, that's terrible manners in my mind, right? But in his mind, that's just the woman's job." And
Yeah.
so obviously there are serious differences between how we run our house and how they run theirs.
Mhm. He's like, come here and have some soju," right?
Yeah, yeah. Which and we do that as well. Um, last time I went over there, he from what he tells me, he doesn't drink very often, but when he does, he drinks everything. And the longer that I've been married to her, and like the more we go over there, the more his liquor collection seems to grow. And this last time that I went over there about a month ago, he brought me he created this like liquor closet. And he's like, Jack, come here, come here, come here. Let me show you all the stuff that I've been picking up. And he had tequilas and vodkas and homemade pear wine that he started making. Like he started moonshining, basically. Like, okay, awesome. Let's get fucked up, man.
Well, it's funny, and I think that that's something that it's, not that you can't communicate, not that you can't talk,
Mhm.
but it's almost like alcohol makes it easier to sort
Yeah,
of bridge the cultural divide. I mean, my wife's
very
Polish, and, it's the same thing with my father-in-law. There's all sorts of various, vodka. Last time I was there, had some cognac from Ukraine that he had gotten, like, 20 years ago. Like, just it's it's like PMA, we just drink. Like it
Yeah.
kind of helps to make you feel like you're bonding with each other, even if there's some communication barrier there. Um,
Yeah, and I mean, alcohol specifically is one of those weird global human experiences that we all share this thing of like we can all sit down and enjoy a drink.
yeah,
Now the Koreans tend to sit down and enjoy 10 to 15.
right.
Well, you're married into a Polish family, so you understand as well.
Hmm.
It can get a little rough and tumble at times, but it is a thing that we can share this experience together. And even when there is like a little bit of a breakdown in communication, or if he wants to talk about something but he's not really sure if he can, then a couple of drinks in and like those inhibitions are gone and he's like, all right, now let me tell you something. Let's clear the air on this thing. Okay, great.
Hmm. Mm, that's interesting. So, what about Korean men? How are they with dating in particular? What is the
Pretty bad.
Yeah. So why do you think that is? Is that because like most marriages used to be arranged, or because of technology? I know that like there's like a reputation. I mean, they're the best StarCraft players in the world. So like, is there something like misplaced focus?
I mean, that's definitely a part of it, but if I'm going to be entirely honest, I think one of the biggest reasons for it is because they're so heavily raised by their mothers. Like
Mm,
I was saying before about like it being common for dad to just not be there all week long and just only show up on the weekends, or or even if you guys are living together, you only see him for an hour or two a day maybe because he comes home from work so late, right? And so you end up with this version of Korean men where like the mothers are doing their best, but they're still just like without a strong father figure leading the way, they're going to end up feminized,
yeah.
and that's a lot of what's happened. Uh, and you go through your main development period, and so many of the Korean women they go to girls only middle schools, high schools, universities, because their parents want to keep them away from young horny boys, right? Okay, but right, totally understand from an individual perspective. On the other side, though, now you have all these men who have grown up and not had any exposure to women, not had any ability to like actually just start to develop relationships, friendships, understanding how to deal with them in social situations, having just general mixed groups of friends. And I I'm from Texas. You're from America, right?
Yeah.
And so, like going to school, we had pretty much even amounts of boys and girls and everything. So, like in your Spanish class, or if you're in band, or if you're in art or whatever, like you're doing group projects and you have mixed gender groups, and you're just figuring out all throughout your life. Oh, okay, there are some kinds of topics I can talk about with just the guys, and there are some that are fine for everybody. This is the way that we deal with things in a mixed company setting, right? The things that you're learning by fucking up when you're like 13 to 17.
Right.
And a lot of the guys here just don't have that opportunity very much, so
Hmm.
they end up just awkward as shit. And like, okay, well, if all I'm going to do is hang out with my guy friends, then we're just going to talk about StarCraft or Call of Duty or our favorite animes or whatever else. And so I don't know how to deal with women in the same way.
Mm. That's so interesting because it really you have a similar problem in the West, but there's less of the workaholic nature as there is in
Mhm.
East Asia. And when you kind of put this together, you can start to see this overlap between, and I think this is important for like especially manosphere, and a lot of manosphere assumptions about men and their ambition and everything. Um, the more workaholic a culture for men, the more feminized the boys, and the more the fertility rate and demographic collapse occurs. And so there's this interesting paradox here where you have guys who are talking about, how they got to work, they got to hustle, and going back to traditional gender roles. Well, fair enough, but I think that they also have some misconceptions about what that really looks like historically. Like they're looking back just one generation, maybe, which was where the problem came from.
Yeah.
That is it really interesting. Because it's something I think about. I don't know. Do you have any children?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. I just had my son 2 months ago, and we want to have.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. This is number two, and so we're looking to have a bunch. I mean, we'll see. We probably got 3 more pregnancies in us, so we'll see what that turns out. But, um, I've been thinking a lot about, as a man, like, how do you wanna be involved with your children? Because right now, I'm super, super involved, but they're also really little, and I'm like, I'm not really like, it doesn't feel like men are meant to be dealing with children when they're this little.
Yeah.
Like, there's just like a but at the same time, I don't wanna be like the guy who never will change a diaper
Sure.
and, is too busy to have big there's like a balance here that you kinda have to find, and I also wonder, um, once your children start to get older, like, okay, maybe you're less involved with all the little micro things when they're really young, but you have to then consciously be aware that they're getting older and then step in to do more with them, to guide them as they start to get to 5 and especially as they get to 10. I mean, um, traditionally, like, at that point, when you get to the age of 8, 10, 12, the boy will step more into the world of his father and have to
Sure.
do things with his father. Um, we used to have kids go out in the field with their father. Sons would go out in the field with their father, they'd do the trade with their father, and we don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
Like you said, they just at home with mom who doesn't have her husband around,
Hmm.
and so she overly attaches with her child to try
Yeah.
to compensate for that, and it's very interesting. It's very interesting. I keep looking back at this stuff and I'm like, is the problem like corporations, like corporate culture? Because it really is in some ways so like because you're like you're describing, I know it's the same thing in Japan, and it has been the same thing very much in America, where you have men who are going to be out working for at least 60 hours a week at a
Hmm.
corporation, and then they come home, they're spiritually sapped, so they're not even present when they are home for the most part.
Right. Well, I'm I'm with you there, except a corporation is always going to do its best to extract as much value for as little
Yeah.
money as possible. That's just what they exist to do. Now,
Mhm.
that said, they'll keep doing that until people say no and stop it. And so
100%.
it's not just that the corporations have pushed for that thing, but that as a general society, everyone said, yeah, okay, sure, why not? Right. And so that it's still really on the people and on the society as a whole that accepted it.
Well,
Right.
I 100% agree with you, and I wonder if there's an issue here with how we define, like, what is masculinity?
Right.
Because there's been the argument of maybe the last post World War II era is like, and maybe before, but that you're a man if you're able to, the more you can work, the more of a man you are, right? The more you can provide, the more of a man you are. And I think a lot of people take that as this kind of assumption. Of course, being a provider as a man hasn't been necessarily the most valuable sexual selection trait in the last 20-ish years, right?
Right.
With
There's the alpha fucks beta bucks, right?
right. And women can provide at least a decent amount for themselves now,
Yeah.
and it's less important that a man, is just working. I think women are more and more interested in emotional connection to the guy that they're with. But what I would say is that I was this always what made a man a man. I mean, I look back at especially like heroic epics and stuff like that. I mean, it
Sure.
seems to me like men in their state of nature are like go through periods of profound risk taking and let's just say expansion, hard work, followed by periods of like laziness.
Mm.
Like men are not necessarily I don't know if they're not like meant to be doing just like 60 to 80-hour work weeks all the time. It's kind of like
Definitely not, and especially not under like, you know, artificial light and the
yeah.
setup in a little shop where they're just huddled at a computer screen in front of their computer. That's not it.
But you think about it like even if you go like it's not about heroic epics or anything like that. You're just looking at men hunting. Like you'd have
Sure.
a hunting party, they'd go out, they'd be gone for a few weeks, and that was pretty grueling. And they'd go and they'd get some animal, they'd bring him back, and then they just like feast and chill, for a
Yeah.
period of time. And it seems like, for men, like men are capable of doing profound amounts of work to accomplish a goal. But then once the goal is accomplished, then there's a rest period, and then they go and do something else again. Whereas right now it's like the treadmill. And it's almost like I feel like we talk a lot about what's happened to women. And I think it's obviously fair, but something before that happened to men, that men were hijacked in some way. And, I don't think it's talked about enough in our community about, how men have been diverted from their own true nature a long time ago. Like we want women to go back to some sort of distortion that was supposed to compensate for the male distortion rather than
Sure.
fix what actually happened to men.
I I like the idea that you had there, and there was something that you touched on there with the heroic epics and about the question of what makes a man,
Yeah.
because there's nobody who would read the Iliad or the Odyssey and be like, yes, Odysseus was not a man. Like, no, that's a man's man, and he did all sorts of shit. Also, not very good at providing for his family, and an absent father for what, like 2 decades or something, right? Like he was not the best on all the fronts, but masculinity seeps out of him. So, what is it that defines masculinity or that makes a man a man? And obviously, I would not recommend that if somebody wants to become a man, they should go and try to conquer Greece. Like that's a bad idea anyway. But there are questions there about what it is, what it means to be a man, and I think that a lot of it comes down to the ideals that one espouses, that one demonstrates in their life, and the ability to have standards and say like, well, this is the thing that we're doing, this is the thing that I believe in, this is the thing that I'm willing to fight for, this is the thing that I will not allow to happen, whether that's in his own life or against the corporate culture, or if he's just not willing to do the dishes after dinner, right? Like, whatever that is, and it's different for every person. I do think that being able to have some standard that you set for yourself, that you say like, no, this is the thing that's important to me, and I'm not willing to compromise on it, regardless of how much the company offers to pay me, or regardless of whatever other situation. I think that that's one of the most foundational points about being a man.
Hmm. Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. And I think that men are starting to come to terms with that. I think that there's starting it's starting to become more of a conversation. Guys are returning to a sense where they're almost their own master again, and they can sort of live life on their own terms, rather than kind of looking to be told what to be doing, right? Yeah.
Well, and to exactly that point, in order to be able to do that, you need to have some sort of mission or drive or something that's important to you. And that's exactly what gets taken away with your 60, 80-hour work week, right? Like if you're, I don't know, a corporate lawyer, or if you're working at a bank, or you're working in finance or whatever, and you're just doing the treadmill thing all day, every day. Each day there's a new project or something that you're working on. but none of it is fulfilling. None of it is your mission, your goal, your calling. And I think that people are going to need to really start to figure that out, especially as AI starts ramping up and a lot of these jobs just start disappearing.
Yeah.
Because we aren't very far out from lawyers getting laid off because we don't need lawyers to check all the documents when the AI can write the document and check it real time against the laws as they're written now, not against the knowledge you learned in law school 20 years ago, right? And so I think there's going to be a lot of that.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people are freaked out about AI, and first off, I'll just acknowledge it. I'm not. This is probably naive, but I'm just saying I'm not particularly impressed by it, even though I know objectively, it is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
I guess I don't expect on a fundamental creative level for machines to be able to replace that spark that people have. I think what people are afraid of is that we've diverted so much from what it means to be a human.
Mm-hmm.
They've been trying to make humans to behave like machines, and now they have machines that are doing that job better, and people are like, well, what's going to happen to me? It's like, go back to your roots.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to compete with your stupid, just say it bluntly, your stupid, robotic job that is not meaningful whatsoever is going to be replaced.
Exactly.
And
Menial tasks are going to be gone.
and
But
and that's
so
not a
much
bad thing. You should welcome that as an
Yes.
opportunity now that you can do something else. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. And I think a lot of people are getting worried because they know, they're like, oh shit, my job is menial. And I get paid a lot of money to just kind of sit here. And then I answer a question once a week or so, but I don't really do anything. So many of those people and those jobs are just going to be on the chopping block.
Yeah, a lot of people have no idea what they're doing with their lives.
Right.
Just, they're just following what they were told, and they drift. And this, you see this play out with dating and relationships too. There's not a lot of conscious choice over over, who they're gonna be with. I don't know. I don't know. It's like, it seems to me in the West, and I'm curious to see what the difference is, in Asia with this, but I almost there's a real problem with people knowing what they want. It's funny because we talk as if we're in a more superior time when there's not arranged marriages and stuff like that. And by the way, I'm not I don't hate on it, but I'm not really a fan of arranged marriages. But
Mm-hmm.
I just point out that at least there was some degree of honesty. People didn't know what they wanted, and so they were kind of put together for practical reasons. Whereas now people don't know what they want, and they just don't get together.
So they get on Tinder.
But they have the illusion that, oh yeah, well, I'm out dating and I'm doing these things, and I'm, that's just mindless. It's mindless. And it's one of the reasons that I think guys really struggle with women, because there is almost this, well, is she if she's attractive and she wants me, that's enough, and that's not attractive to a woman.
Yeah. This is exactly why I coach the way that I do. So like I was telling you earlier, the boot camp is that's kind of a separate thing. That's for guys who are really looking for this specific thing. But for all of my longer term coaching and for the actual courses that I do online, the very first thing that I have them do is we sit down and we create what I call a foundation document.
Mm-hmm.
And we figure out okay, exactly who is it that you're looking for? So what type of girl are you looking for? What traits are you looking for in her? If you could create just the dream version, a weird science version of your girl, okay? What kind of traits does she possess? And what kind of relationship are you looking for with her? Mm-hmm. Are you looking for this girl? Are you specifically just looking for one night stands? Because if you are, that's fine, but you need to admit it up front. Say, this is what I'm looking for. And then whenever you hook up with a girl and then she sticks around too long, you have no issue with oh, but should I let her stick around? No, because you know what you're looking for. But The same goes the other way around, because 90% of guys, whenever they fill out this foundation document, they all say like, actually, I would really like to have a long-term relationship. And I'm like, okay, cool. That's fine as well. But let me ask you a question. If you're looking for a long-term relationship, but you're out going to the club every weekend, are you actually looking for a long-term relationship? Because it doesn't seem like it. Now, would you believe a girl if she told you, yeah, I'm looking for a long-term relationship. I want something serious. I want something real. Also, I go to the club every weekend. You'd be like, no, you're full of shit, right?
Yeah.
Like, hold yourself to the same standard. Know what you're looking for and act that way. And that one small thing of sitting down, writing down, defining what it is that they're looking for, and saying, right, this is the behavior that I'm going to follow to get the thing that I want. That solves so many of their dating problems, because it gives them a purpose. Like, this is the thing I'm going for. I'm not just floating about like a rudderless ship, just waiting to see what beach I crash onto.
Yeah, it's congruence. It's congruence with what,
Yes.
they have to get rid of that dissonance, because the dissonance is what actually stops them from, getting what they want, which,
Sure.
as you point out, it may be what they say they want, or it may be what they're doing. They have to reconcile that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, would you say that, how do I put this? It's one thing if a guy is going to be is going through a period of dating because he doesn't have experience with women, like, he wants a long-term relationship in the end, but he
Hmm.
kind of needs to go through a little bit of exposure. Like, I think that there's an honesty to that,
Yeah.
but what kind of, it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, what I see on Twitter, is you see guys who really complain about the current situation, in dating and how women are,
Hmm.
and yet their whole orientation is around just hooking up with girls. Like, I don't care if a guy is out there, wants to hook up with girls, but there's sort of this bizarre I don't it's almost like they're judging what they're going after,
Hmm.
which to me is very, I I think that there's a dishonesty there that,
Yeah.
or immaturity that they don't wanna acknowledge.
Right. Well, I mean, there 100% is, right? Like, you can't in the same breath say like, oh, I hate all these Tinder sluts. Now let me get back on Tinder and keep swiping. Right? Like, you need to. Well, I guess you don't need to. You can do whatever you want to do, but it is that dissonance that you were talking about. That thing that's going on in their head where they're like, I hate this part of the culture, but I'm going to keep participating in it and be a part of it. And
Mhm.
I understand where they are, where they're like, I wish that I didn't have to do this.
Right.
I wish that my high school sweetheart never dumped me, and that I was just happy from the word go, and never had to go out and do all this stuff. Like, I understand that feeling. But also at the same time, you have to recognize that when you're participating in that part of the culture, you're furthering it, right? Because if all the guys just collectively said, you know what, we disapprove of online dating and of what it's done to the culture and to gender relations, so we are all just collectively 100% of guys are just going to drop it like
Mhm.
that. Well, like, then the women would stop behaving that way,
Right.
right? Like, you are feeding them. You're basically paying them to do the thing that you hate them doing.
Yeah.
You're still swiping on these girls. You're still feeding their ego. You're still going on Instagram and liking all the pictures from this girl who just keeps showing her ass. Like, you are feeding the beast.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that, to add on to that, when there's almost a hypocrisy, because it's like talking about how, men aren't masculine, and yet these guys are ultimately following the lead of women. They're not saying to
Yes.
themselves like, "Well, I don't really care what the girls are doing. I'm not participating in it. I'm not
Yes.
doing it." And then leaving these girls, like, if attractive, um, successful guys with game stopped feeding the beast, then
Yep.
the whole system would collapse basically, because
Exactly.
all the girls would be like, "Wait a minute, like, I can't get any high quality guy." It's like, "Yeah, you can." Like,
Yeah.
they don't even want anything to do with you. They're not even, like, tricking them by providing them with some degree of attention. They're just like, "No, you guys are sluts. We're done with you completely."
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that's what people have to do. Now, the flip side to it is that the guys who are successful in online dating, it's literally just it's pussy postmates. Like they just push the button and it gets delivered straight to their home and they don't have to do anything. So it's really hard to try to convince them, like, you're damaging yourself as well. Like, this is not good for you, and it's fucking up your dopamine receptors, and it's fucking up your ability to view other humans in any sort of objective light. I really recommend that you stop this. And they're like, okay, I hear what you're saying on one hand, right? But on the other hand, pussy postmates.
yeah,
So,
yeah. It's
you
true. No, this is I'm so glad you brought that up because, one of the things I've like, a certain archetype of client that I've had where they don't have a problem getting girls, they're attractive to women, but they have a hard time getting quality, and one of the things I tell them is like, "Well, you're gonna have to stop dating the women that you're dating, like, you're gonna have to be a lot more selective about who you choose to spend time with,"
hmm
and it doesn't even really take that long. If they do
right.
that for, like, a couple months, then like, a higher quality girl is gonna enter the picture. But, if you're seeing this rotation of women, they get distracted, and while I will agree that promiscuity is certainly worse for women, in
Yeah.
terms of how it messes them up and their
Yeah.
attachment mechanisms, it does mess up men too. I mean, as a man, maybe you have a little bit more of a longer leash, um, but it's if you're doing that over and over again, I mean, even as you just said, you can just associate it with dopamine. Like
Yeah.
it there's a novelty thing. There's a I don't feel good. I'm gonna go get something, I'm gonna go get the validation of having sex with somebody new.
Yeah.
And this is something I wanted to segue into, for this kind of last segment is how does it change with a man and a woman when from this dating period as you get into a more serious relationship in marriage? How do the dynamics change? How does what is attractive change, and how does a man have to sort of adjust his thinking?
I think that one of the biggest shifts, uh, and it's not exactly whenever you move into marriage, or at least it wasn't for me, but once the relationship starts to become serious, then it's no longer about showing her cool things about me that she didn't know, or uh, you know showing off is the wrong word, but doing things that it's like, oh wow, I didn't know you could do that. Oh, because there's no more newness or novelty, but it becomes more about, can you keep this up?
Mhm.
Can you? Yeah, sure. The first few dates you go on, right? You're high energy and you're so fun, and you've got these jokes just lined up and ready to go, and you know how to bring the best out of everybody and turn it into this new thing. And like, okay, cool. Can you keep that up? Now, how many aspects of yourself do you have? Do you only shine when you're out and getting drunk, or can you be just as cool hanging out at home and like, hey, I have an idea for a new recipe, let's cook something together, and like keep things fun and interesting without having to come up with new things every time. It's just like you start to get good at understanding one another and keeping her entertained, for lack of a better word, like keeping her interested and engaged and involved in everything. And I do think that that's the man's job in a sense, because when women aren't engaged, when they do get bored, that's when they start to wander. That's when they start to wonder, like, well, is this relationship still fun? And that's very much an issue, especially in current Western culture. But I think it's everywhere. It's that, especially now in this world of instant gratification and this world of like, well, Netflix didn't add a new show this week, so I'm canceling my subscription. Like,
Hmm.
can you keep things fun and interesting even when they're still the same, even when you're on a routine, even when you're going to the same job, when you're taking care of the kids, and like the routine sets in, but can you still be fun? Can you still be interesting? Can you still make her look at you with that wide-eyed wonder of like, yeah, this is the guy who I married. This guy is awesome.
Mhm.
And I think that's the real golden ticket right there, is to learn how to not manufacture, but draw that feeling of wonder and excitement and of pride
Mhm.
out of your wife.
Yeah, I mean, I put this out the other day, and obviously some people can quibble about, is it really the number one thing? But the number one, my opinion is that the number one thing that you can't let a woman experience is boredom.
Yeah.
Um, they over time it becomes it the alleviation of boredom can become a very toxic direction for women. I mean, that's how you get infidelity. That's how you get women wanting to leave relationships. But I think that there's this misconception because, yeah, in the beginning, there is all this novelty. Like,
Mhm.
who are you? She, you're kind of mysterious. And I'm not saying that there aren't new levels that you find from the other person over time.
Sure.
Um, there are more things that you uncover just simply due to the proximity. Sometimes that person doesn't even necessarily know them about themselves, like it's not some kind of gamey thing, but it is just about keeping life interesting, doing, so if you're somebody who has enthusiasm, curiosity, and you yourself are like, yeah, let's go, we're going to do this together. We're going to do this together. We're going to go to this place. It doesn't have to be some sort of like Instagram journey that like you're constantly going to some new exotic location. It's just that you're an active participant in the relationship. You're creating memories on a
Hmm.
regular basis. Whereas what you see a lot of guys do is they get into the relationship and then they get really comfortable.
Yeah. Like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I did
Yeah.
my part.
Yeah, exactly. "Oh, she's here, we're just gonna sit at home and, watch TV to get together and, drink." And,
Yeah.
uh, I think a lot of guys also get thrown off because many women fall into that themselves, and they're like, "Well, she's, like, okay with it, so what's wrong with it?" It's like, "Well, you're not leading."
Yeah.
And guarantee you that she would be like, the vast majority of women would love for you to take them out someplace, even if her initial response, let's say you've been have this sort of like lazy relationship and you have a new idea, you're gonna, go someplace else. You're gonna go someplace else for dinner, or you're gonna take a trip someplace. Maybe she actually creates some level of resistance at first. She's like, "No, I don't want to do that." Like, you have to push through that anyway, because
Yeah.
that's just her own sort of defense mechanism, that's her own sort of internal resistance. Once you actually get her out there and moving, the energy starts to come back, and these same guys are, like, wondering why their sex life collapsed, why, it's just not really exciting, why
Yeah.
everyone's getting fat, It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's very much part of it. And I I don't know, like this idea of creating, no matter how small it is, some kind of surprise, right? Like something exciting. You can turn anything exciting if you frame it right.
Right.
And so like, oh, I reached into my bag the other day and I found a couple of like Hershey's Kissies that I guess had fallen out. They were in the bottom corner of the bag. And so I took them out and just held them in my hand. And I went to my wife and I was like, hey, I have a surprise for you, but it's going to cost you 2 kisses.
Yeah.
And she's like, okay, let's see what it is. And so she kisses me, and then I hold out my hand and I drop it, and it's 2 Hershey's kisses. But it's stupid. It's nothing, but right, it makes her laugh, and it's framed as a surprise, and it's something exciting, and oh, it's going to cost you. And like the right framing can turn the most mundane thing into the most exciting thing, and poor framing can turn the most exciting thing into the most banal thing as well.
Yeah.
So learning how to control that, how to manufacture this kind of excitement even when it's not that exciting.
Mhm.
It's important to keeping people interested and keeping people focused. And if you don't know how to keep your own wife interested and focused, then like you're really missing a lot of this.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because there's a little, I don't know if you saw it, but there's some little, mini drama with some guy on Twitter recently who had this profile about having, he was like gonna pay $20,000 or something to have someone get him a wife, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, like, and so he had this whole profile, and the issue here is that guy's really arrogant. So
Mm-hmm.
it's one of these things like, I'm the best in the world, so, like, it doesn't make any sense why women shouldn't be with me, so someone should, do the work and find the woman to be, it's just all this bullshit.
Yeah.
And I looked at his dating profile, and it sucked. It is a terrible profile. But
Right.
it was terrible profile not because the guy himself wasn't interesting. I mean, he's an intelligent guy, he's a good-looking guy. S you know, there's a lot of things I'm sure he could talk about and that he could, wanna explore and that would be exciting for a woman. But the way he was positioning everything, it was like it was so boring. It was so boring, it was so try hard. And this is
Mm-hmm.
exactly, it's exactly what you're saying, which is there was nothing left to the imagination. The framing of it was like super logic heavy, fact
Mm-hmm.
heavy. Whereas like you can create more excitement by and you find some old pieces of candy in the
Yeah.
bottom of your backpack.
Random
And
chocolates.
yeah, because it's the energy that you provide with to it, right?
Sure.
It gives it a different quality.
Yeah.
So, and it's that little teasing, and one of the things I see so much with guys is with relationships is that they really do take them for granted. A relationship, just because a woman doesn't leave, it doesn't mean that like guys get pissed off that things aren't how they were in the beginning of their relationship. Well, okay, to a certain extent, it's never going to be exactly as it was in the beginning, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean it's going to be worse than the beginning. I mean, there's a certain specialness to that honeymoon phase, but you can have tons of excitement, but with even more familiarity. It can even be better in some ways than it was at the beginning, but you have to make the relationship a priority.
Yeah.
And this goes into everything we talked about before with like, okay, you want to work 80 hours a week. What's that going to cost you in terms of your relationship? And
Yeah.
maybe that's what you prefer. I mean, some guys have certain vocations and it's maybe non-negotiable and that's a sacrifice. But I think there needs to be some degree of acknowledgement that you can use your time as efficiently as possible and you should, but there's always a trade-off. There's always some degree of a trade-off. You
Of
like
course.
and and that I think is one of the more underrated reasons why you have bums, like guys who are not all that impressive will often steal the girl of a guy who is impressive. And you're like, "Well, how did you go for this guy?" It's like, "He was there and you weren't."
And exciting.
Yeah, and exciting. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. He was there and exciting, and you were off there, and you were so focused on your work, like, you forgot what it was like to, have some fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wrote a big Twitter thread a while back that that people seem to really get a lot out of. It was about the things that I learned while being a homeless busker here in Korea.
Yeah.
And you know, like it's amazing because you would think like, oh, well, you went from being like gainfully employed and respectable member of society and actually wearing like clothes with buttons on them and things like that to just like, I don't know, man, I was a street bum. Like I woke up and it was raining today, so I decided to just stay home and play Mass Effect, but it didn't matter, right? Like none of that seemed to matter at all because I was out and I was talking to people and I was, whenever you meet a girl and she says, "What do you do?" and you say, "Oh, I'm a homeless busker." She's like, "I'm sorry, what?" Right? Like, so you're not just the pattern interrupt, but it's like, no, tell me more. Now, like I'm already intrigued, right? Like I didn't even have to cast the line; they were grabbing my hook and like reel me in, and all that it takes is for you as the man to not be there in the relationship, and then some amount of time, right? Nobody knows what that amount of time is, but eventually there's going to be a confluence of events where she's bored and someone else is there and interesting.
Yeah.
Like it's almost a guarantee.
Yeah, and yet you still see so many guys who, I mean, I'm not saying that they don't have cause to be pissed, but who blame it on the woman, and they don't really take responsibility for the fact that they were not present in the relationship. I mean, this is a gripe I have with the red pill community because I've worked with tons of guys. I have a pretty good idea of what happens in a lot of these like, black pill sort of, divorces where the girl runs off with some other guy. I'm not saying a lot of these situations are fully fair.
Sure.
Um, but you really have two archetypes. I mean, you have the one situation where the guy was always kind of a chump from the very beginning, and he married some girl with a million red flags and didn't, just had no awareness of it. And so this was just kind of an inevitability. But that like maybe 20% gets elevated to being like 100%, which is not true. Most of the time, it's the guy is just not emotionally engaged at all in the relationship and somehow expects that she's going to stick around forever because he's been working and, he's been a good man, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, be a good man, but be a boring as fuck man. And it's not what she wasn't happy. It's like, well,
Right.
what does it take to make a woman happy? It's like, like, come on, like take some fucking
Apparently a guitar and a set of ripped jeans.
yeah.
And if you can't compete with that.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, and then they get pissed off about it because 'cause they're like, "Well, women are so superficial and so vapid." It's like, okay, you know, you weren't there and you weren't doing anything fun. Like, if you just took some time per week, if you considered it important to take a few hours per week to do something fun with your woman, she wouldn't have left you.
Yeah.
But instead, it was more important for you to do something that, like, the family needed, or
Yeah.
whatever, or, like, I had to do it. Okay, whatever. You made your choices, take some responsibility, learn from your mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you said earlier, everything in the world has a cost to it. It's
Yeah.
not always financial. In fact, a lot of times it's not. But there's a concept that I've been kicking around in my head, and it goes to exactly this. And I'm not quite there yet, but there's some way that this is intimately tied into game and into relationships. And it's the concept of a locus of control. So essentially, when something happens, what was the cause of it? In the case of a failed marriage, okay, did it if it failed because of her, because she cheated, then if it had succeeded, was it still because of her?
Mhm.
If it had succeeded and you are the cause, if you're the locus of control, if you're the one that's in control, and so okay, it succeeded because I did such a good job, then by definition, if it fails, it's also because you did a bad job.
Yeah.
But if it fails and you're blaming her, you say, oh, it's her fault because she did this and this and this. okay, then you're also accepting that if the relationship had succeeded, or for however long it did succeed, that was on her. She
Mhm.
was the one making that happen. And I feel like guys especially have a really hard time with this, where they'll take credit for the good things but then blame the bad elsewhere. I approached this girl and she gave me her number because I'm so smooth and I was amazing, but then I approached this other girl and she told me to get lost, and that's because she's obviously just a bitch and a lesbian. And it's like, well, it's not both. Either
Yeah.
you're in control of the situation, in which case you're responsible for the successes and failures, or you're not in control of the situation, in which case you're letting everybody else dictate your life. And so you ultimately have to make those decisions of, am I going to take responsibility for this thing or not? You can't take responsibility for everything in your life because a lot of things are out of your control. But if there's something that you would take credit for the success of it, you also must take credit for its failure if that
Mhm.
happens.
Yeah, and I think, you know, people get also too caught up in the truth of whether or not something was, you know, really your responsibility or not. I mean, I just kind of consider that to be like immature thinking.
Yeah.
It's and also just not how the universe works. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, everything has cause and effect. Like the linear mind that exists in this dimension will try to draw cause and effects because that helps to make sense of it, but the reality is that everything is constantly causing and affecting everything else.
Sure.
You know, it's an illusion. Cause and effect is in a certain sense an illusion
Yeah.
that we use just to organize reality. So, you know, to like argue about whether it was true or not, like just accept the fact that there's always some degree of control on your end because you're connected to that event. Therefore, you had to have impacted it in some way, and the
Sure.
extent of it is kind of irrelevant. I will just make this point though that I find funny, which is any guy who's like gone and met enough women, right, and has the experience of sort of, especially when you look back as you have more and more wisdom on it,
Hmm.
you can see so many times that like a big success that you had with a girl, you took some girl home, and then a few years later, you look at that and you're with like clear eyes, and you're like, that was all her, really. Like she,
Yeah. Like she
like she
went
really
out
was.
that night looking for dick, and I just happened to be there.
Yeah, I didn't screw it up. You know, I didn't
Yeah.
screw it up. She,
Well, and not screwing things up is a lot of what, especially early on, dating is. It's just like,
it,
guys think that dating is competitive, that like you should beat the women in order for them to want to be with you. And it's like, no, man, it's cooperative. She wants you to succeed. She wants to have a fun date. She wants to have good sex. She wants to have a good time together. Like, she wants all these things to happen. All you have to do is kind of not screw it up a lot of the times.
yeah, it is really interesting. You know, you can make an argument like to what extent it does game really get you girls that you otherwise wouldn't have gotten versus, you know, because I think most of what we learn in game is just learn how to present yourself in an attractive way and then, you know, guide the interaction to its natural conclusion rather than like mess it up or get in
Mhm.
your own way and trip up the situation. I think it's a very only really more on the advanced side where you're actually able to get girls who are maybe kind of cool or indifferent to you to warm up. And you know, you can argue that that's not really necessary for the average person, average guy to ever
Sure.
know. Um, but yeah, guys in their mind are like they learn some game and it's like, okay, now I got that girl interested in me. It's like, no, you you know, you just learn to stop tripping yourself up. You know, that's all it really is. And
Yeah. A
there's
lot of
value.
times. Go on.
I was just say there's value in that, but I
Yeah.
think it's just when you look at it from the perspective that you're just not messing things up and you're learning to read, okay, that girl is not into stuff tonight. That girl is closed off. She has her own thing, but this girl is open. So I'm going to go and talk to her because she's looking maybe at me, or I can just tell she's open in general to some
Mhm.
sort of interaction. Like it's almost like rather than trying to force any sort of you're just putting yourself in the place of success, in the
Yeah,
flow of success for that evening. And, you know, girls wanna have fun, you know,
yeah,
it's not like you have to convince them to do it.
yeah, yeah. And this is one of the things that I keep on trying to get guys to get there mentally. Like there are a lot of concepts that guys can understand on a mental level, but then to actually apply them and be like, no, I get it. And the idea that all dating and all relationships are cooperative. Like it's something that both people benefit from this being successful. They want this to succeed. So as long as she's not just put off by you and like not interested, or she has a boyfriend or whatever else, right? Like, but if she's open to it at all, she wants you to succeed. She wants you to do well. She wants you to be funny. She wants you to have a good time. And she wants to have fun too.
Mhm. Well, Jack, I really appreciate the conversation. This was really
Yeah,
cool.
this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. So tell people where they can find you. I'm gonna put out everything in the description, but just
Sure.
go through
Yeah.
it.
You can find me on Twitter at Real Jack North, YouTube at Real Jack North, and if you're interested in any of my stuff, I have a free video course that guys can go and get, and it's called Flirting 101. It's basically a 15 video primer to get them going on like how to actually have good, successful conversations. You can find that and everything else at realjacknorth.com. And you can find anything about that. Message me, jack@realjacknorth.com, right?
Awesome. Yeah, all those links are gonna be in the description, guys. Definitely work with Jack, especially if you're gonna go out into soul. I think it'd be he's the guy to go to. So
And at
appreciate
least
you.
you'll never be bored.
That's right. At least you'll never be bored. You'll have a good time. Um, I appreciate you, Jack. I'll see you around.
Hey, thanks for having me, Pat.